Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, which is about the Black Robin Farm development. Very warm welcome to you wherever you are, and a funny thing to be saying in July, but I hope it's dry where you are too. So welcome, and we are going to be talking about Robin Farm development, and we've got a couple of speakers who I'll be introducing shortly, but I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Lee Shepherd, and I'm 3VA's Community Development Manager. 3VA is a voluntary action that works across Lewes District, Wealden, and of course Eastbourne too. And we work with voluntary and community groups and local communities. We're really pleased to be hosting this webinar at the invitation of the Town and Gallery. We're keen to know more about the Black Robin Farm development, as I'm sure all of you tuning in will be. And both Joe Hill, who's the director at Town and Gallery, and Fergus Feilden from Feilden Fowles Architects, one of the architects working on the development, are joining us this afternoon, and they'll be giving short presentations, and they'll be taking some of your questions. And obviously, we'd like to get through as many questions as possible. Just ahead of that, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping and sort of explain how the webinar is going to run. So there are some important things you should know. The webinar is going to be recorded on Zoom. It's live captioned, which means that if you want to access what people are saying, if you need to see what people are saying, you can either click on the closed caption on the CC icon on your screen, in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, or you can click on the stream text link, which has been posted in the chat. The Zoom chat function is closed today for all attendees, but there will be an opportunity for you to put questions live as we come towards the end of the seminar in the question and answer function. And again, you can access that on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We have received a high number of questions in advance, and thank you for them. So it may not be possible for us to cover all of the live questions, and we're going to endeavour to cover as much as we possibly can in the time available, and we will be finishing at 5:30. As I say, it won't be possible to answer them all, but Joe and Fergus are going to do their very best. We've tried to pick questions that are representative of the kind of concerns and topics that have been most commonly asked. So we've also picked some shorter questions that cover broad topics that received a lot of interest and that folk at the Towner and Feilden Fowles Architects are best qualified to answer. A few of the questions we've received are probably best responded to by the council or indeed UK central government. And while we want to be as open and transparent as possible, we just don't feel that some of those questions are ones that can realistically be answered in this webinar. If by the end of the webinar you feel that your question hasn't been answered, please rest assured that there will be more opportunities like this to ask questions as the project goes on. And Joe and his team will try and answer as many specific questions if you would like to get in touch. Probably the largest portion of questions we've had has been about funding allocation and why and how this project was allocated, the levelling up funding ahead of other projects, and causes ranging from roads, footpaths, homelessness, derelict buildings, the bandstand, Motcombe Pool, and more. So before we get into the presentation, I'm really delighted to introduce Joe Hill, who's the director at the Towner. And Joe, if you wouldn't mind, just start by answering a question we've had from Debbie, which is, where is the money coming from? If public funds are being used, how was the Black Robin Farm selected? What was the inclusive democratic process adopted for the selection of the project?
Thanks, Lee, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to sort of get a chance to sort of answer some of these questions. And as Lee just mentioned, before we get into the funding question, I think we are going to allow people, if they really feel they haven't been answered, to sort of email the Towner, and we'll try our best to answer those questions in email. And there'll be lots of other opportunities. This is not the end of this conversation. I think the team are going to put the email address in the chat for people to contact. I'm very much aware that we want this project to work for everyone in Eastbourne, and really want to be open to answering all your questions and concerns or positivities about the project. It's not the end of consultation as well. As you know, the town are developing a programme for the site as we go along, and we're shaping the sort of activity that will happen on there. So really love to hear puts into that. On the funding question, it's really an enormous amount, and I think the recent Levelling Up Towns Fund that was allocated to Eastbourne in April has slightly confused things even more, because it was a very different process to go through the Towns Fund than was there in Levelling Up Round 1, which is what Black Robin. So in terms of where money is coming from, the majority of the money is coming from the Levelling Up Fund, which was a local government initiative around economic growth. It was round 1 of that fund. There have subsequently been other rounds of that fund, and then there has been Towns Fund allocations as well. And I'll talk through the differences with those things in just a minute. It's important to say that that it's a capital. It was a capital fund, so it was really there to enable capital investment as opposed to revenue investment. So it was about buildings and construction of objects. It wasn't there to sort of cover revenue funding in terms of what you might be using to tackle things like homelessness or issues that require that sort of revenue strand. So just to talk through the democratic process of levelling of money that has been allocated to Eastbourne, and then a board of people have been assigned to decide where that money be allocated. Levelling Up Round 1 was very, very different. It was a bid process. So the town was, like with all towns across the country, was asked to submit a bid at quite short notice, I would like to say. It was very, very tight turnaround from the announcement from the government to the deadline when we had to get the expression of interest in. And the process, as I experienced it, wasn't my process, it was the council's process. There was a steering group immediately set up that had representatives across major organisations, businesses, community groups, Seafront Association, Hospitality Association, the BID, the Chamber. And within that steering group, there was then an open call request for projects that people might want to be submitted to Levelling Up, and that was open to anybody locally to submit the project. I think from memory there were about 12 or 13 projects that got through the initial bit of scrutiny, and then what the council did was analyse all of those projects against the criteria for the Levelling Up Fund, and the criteria for the fund is about economic growth, and in some ways that's why it favours new projects over sort of the restoration of other projects or buildings. And whether you agree with that or not, I think that was the process that we were faced with. I completely agree that some of those other projects that have been listed by Lee do need funding. This is not a competition, and I don't like when government funding becomes a competition. I think they're all really valid projects. Some of them weren't issues at the time that we made the bid. Like, for example, Motcombe Pool was still, it was in the middle of COVID and it had closed for COVID, but there was an assumption it would reopen after that. That obviously subsequently changed. And similarly, some of the derelict shop units have become, there's more of them been added to the list since that bid went in. So the town wanted to submit a suite of projects that they would be really confident would be successful. And Black Robin Farm was selected alongside 2 other projects. And that's where the difference is with the Towns Fund, where the money is allocated and then a board selects its allocation. And I think that for me, the Black Robin Farm project, it's not surprising that when that criteria happened, it scored the highest of any project, because it's new, it creates jobs, it also creates new visitors to our town. But for me, it fundamentally makes a strong link and a connection with an asset that we can really use, and we can use for everybody in this community, both to generate new visitors and therefore economic growth for the town. But the downland space, and particularly the Seven Sisters Cliffs, are a place that can help our town do lots and lots of things, like support health and well-being, have us as a sort of national and international leader around landscape management and custodianship. And I think the potential of this project, which we designed very, very specifically to not just be visitor focused, but to be a real asset for our residents, does meet the criteria really strongly and will bring that economic benefit to the town. Lee, do you want me to go straight into presentation?
Thank you, Joe. Thanks very much for that answer to that question. And yeah, please do go ahead. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I just wanted to be clear about is that, our conversation with government has been that the project is of a visionary nature and actually got them excited and interested. And that's what they were looking for in that particular round of funding. And it's continued to build a relationship between central government and Eastbourne on a strategic level that allows us to not just talk to those direct government funds, but things like the Heritage Fund, Arts Council, all English Heritage, Natural England, all of these government bodies, even Visit England as well, are really excited about working with us on this project and helping it to benefit everybody in Eastbourne. Shall I go straight in? I'm going to share my screen just to show you. Apologies. I hope that me and Fergus don't overlap with slides, but it may be that we do. Can everybody see that? Great. So the Black Robin Farm project, just to give a little bit of background to where it came from. We, as a gallery, have sort of been on a bit of a journey over the last few years, and it's fair to say that we've exceeded, I suppose, the expectation of the original Towner project in the new building. When it was originally conceived, it was imagined that 100,000 visitors would visit us every year. But as of 2023, we're now over 200,000 visitors, and our ambitions are for 250,000 visitors to the building, which shows you that actually the building does start to struggle when it gets to that number of people. And there is scope and a growing audience in which we can sort of build on the successes of that. And we really wanted to demonstrate that the power of arts and culture and creativity to help and support the regeneration and economic growth of Eastbourne through projects like the Turner Prize. It's really important to us that we continue to champion Eastbourne, and we have these sort of visionary projects that continue to place the town as an important creative, cultural and heritage place to visit and to come, live, work and invest in as well. Just a few things on the Turner Prize. It managed to, through analysis, input £16.1 million into the Eastbourne economy over and above what would have been expected in that time. But there's some other interesting statistics that are part of our evaluation as well that really help with the story of Black Robin Farm, which are things like the average spend of a visitor on a day trip to Eastbourne is around £80, whereas if you get a visitor staying 1 or 2 nights in the town, that number increases to around £580. So there's a real driver here in this project to move people from the sort of day visitor into those overnight stayers. And I think adding to the cultural portfolio and heritage, bringing heritage and environment into that mix will help us with that sort of green tourism and really thinking about where the future vision goes for the visitor economy. We have some fantastic assets in this town on the seafront, some heritage assets. We've got brilliant theatres, things here. Culture is part of the story of Eastbourne. It always has been since its conception. And I think it has to play a big role in the strategy going forward. And the big thing for me is now it's time to really connect in the booming sort of Seven Sisters offer with the offer of the seaside resort and make sure Eastbourne is the hub to explore the Seven Sisters as opposed to Brighton, Lewis and other partners. A few other things just to say on the Turner Prize, of the people that were surveyed, and this is people in the Beacon, seafront, not outside the gallery in the station, 36% of those visitors said that Turner Prize or Eastbourne Alive was the top reason for their visit to Eastbourne. So huge influx of visitors. We know from Southern Railways that 22% increase through the gates of Eastbourne station between May and December. So there's a big opportunity here to use these things to drive visitors into Eastbourne and hopefully get them to spend more and stay longer. 63% of those visitors actually spent money predominantly in independent local businesses as well. So that's another sort of difference between the kind of visitor profile. So just to come back to the project itself, the Seven Sisters and the Eastbourne Downland space has huge opportunities for Eastbourne, but currently we know that lots of visitors to that area. There's over 900,000 cars currently on the Beachy Head Road. are not sort of accessing it from Eastbourne itself. And I think that's where this project can be a catalyst to repivot that round and ensure that we use Eastbourne as the primary hub. We know that at Berlin Gap, for example, they have a visitor number around 650,000 people, and they're struggling to manage those visitors. So it's really important as part of the development of the Downland strategy is that we start to think about where these visitors can go that isn't simply on the cliff edge, because there's doing an enormous amount of damage to that cliff edge. And the longer vision for this around creating a corridor through Black Robin Farm and down towards Berlin Gap allows us to have different points of access for those visitors. And particularly the booming visitors from China, South Korea and Japan, which are now, we believe, to be number one sort of visitor destination outside of London. But mostly the route for that is through Brighton and then on a public bus over to the Seven Sisters. Whereas actually what we'd like to do is to bring some of that visitor profile in through Eastbourne. We know that they spend more in destinations than UK and European visitors. So it's really critical that we do that. But we don't just want to make another towner on the Downs. That's not the proposal here. This is about celebrating place. You know, for a long time, I've worked in lots of different areas, Essex, London, Yorkshire, Derbyshire, and I've done work around placemaking and where culture and creativity can have a big impact. And you know, for me, placemaking is about playing on your unique strengths. So really finding the assets that drive a story. And I think the Seven Sisters and the Downland space really does that. And use heritage to drive a vision for the future. So don't just look back at heritage, but use it as a story to design a vision for the future. So I run a museum. I'm really interested in what museums do and how they can change people's lives. But what I'm more interested in is thinking about what the new model of a museum is and how we can bring new multidisciplinary strands in to have a more sustainable museum, both financially and environmentally. And we can bring things like culture and creativity together with ecology and environment and heritage in one place to really celebrate the Downland space and its relationship to Eastbourne. I think that for me is really the sort of key to this, is that this is nowhere else in the country, I don't think, is somebody offering a sort of attraction like this. And I think we can really, with Fergus's sort of input as a fantastic architect that's so sensitive to the landscape and to the space, we can make a really important project that is, I mean, I think going to be world class and will drive that sort of international visitorship through. So that vision, you know, that we're calling here the sort of Eastbourne and Seven Sisters 2050 plan is really about what do we do over the next 25 years to really to sort of think about that whole Seven Sisters Park strategically, making connections, making better pathways, much better sustainable transport to get up there. And what are the benefits for Eastbourne of being the centre point of which we explore that from? So it's really important for us that the farm remains a farm, essentially, certainly in its feel. So the architectural approach has been very much to keep as much of the material fabric as possible. Sometimes that's not possible where things are really degraded, or we need to provide access. We want this site to be as accessible as possible for the widest range of people. But also, if we are going to take art from museum collections up there, there does need to be some environmental controls to be able to do that, and some security controls. So that's where we've intervened with some newer building. So this view here shows the approach into the main sort of complex of the farm. But I just wanted to talk through this plan really, because it gives a good overview of the sort of different user groups that will be using the site. So at the top of the site, with the red dotted line around it, is the old farmhouse and stable block. And this will be the home of 16 new creative industry workspaces aimed towards makers that are based in Sussex. So this is going to be critically adding to the creative industry workspace, which we know Eastbourne is very limited in numbers. There's waiting lists at any creative industry spaces. We also know that the creative industries are a fantastic industry for particularly seaside towns to have behind the visitor economy and bucking it up. It relies on not large infrastructure. It relies on very good internet connection, which we happen to have in Eastbourne, actually some of the best in the country. And it's usually SMEs and freelancers, so it doesn't require very large buildings and things. So the creative industries is a boom sector nationally. It is a big focus of the new government, and it has to be part of a future Eastbourne, because I think it's really beneficial. Also, we have a brilliant number of creatives already living and working here, but struggling to find space to make their work. As you come down, you come to the old, what were the holiday cottages, which will be, half of them will be used for site facilities and staff facilities, and the other two will remain as accommodation. So that allows us to have scientists, climate scientists, ecologists, artists working on site. As you come into the main farm complex, the green dotted line is around the education wing, which is a really big part of the project. And for me, you know, we have set an ambition in the Enterprise of working with every Year 9 student in the coastal region, and we got really close to seeing every single one. You know, this is not about arts and culture only. This is about cross-curriculum. This is about getting people into new spaces, out into natural spaces. As part of that education facility, there are some new facilities, classrooms, studios, but also growing space and kitchens as well, so that sort of the history of food production and food production can be part of the education offer. And different to a museum generally, where we are looking to partners to help deliver some of this fantastic program. So people like East Sussex College Group, Sussex University are interested in developing curriculum for this site. We've also been talking to colleagues at places like Schools Without Walls, with Eden, and other partners that are really keen to get access to the site and use it as an educational facility. To the left of that is a yellow dotted line around some of the old Flint buildings, and we want this to be a heritage visitor centre, so taking some of the natural history collection of Eastbourne and really telling that story of the downland space, the food production, as well as having some food offer in there so people can actually experience some of the produce that's made on the site. To the north of that, we have the gallery building. So this is a new building that will be set a bit deeper into the ground than the building that's currently there. And that will allow us to have some gallery space to take those fantastic Eric Ravilius paintings and show them in the landscape that they were originally painted. And then just to the right of that, around the red dotted line, is a very large agricultural barn that we're calling the events barn. And for me, the idea of taking, live performance up there, music and different sorts of art forms into that space is really, really exciting. But the critical thing is to keep this project as open and friendly as possible, and do minimal intervention to what is already an amazing site. And the unique thing for me about the site is when you drop into it from the sort of driveway area, you are suddenly in the middle of nowhere. And that effect on people, particularly from a mental health point of view and stress. I mean, I know myself, quite a stressful job and a young family. Going into space, the stress just melts off you instantly. And that is so powerful. And currently, our residents, most of this downland space isn't accessible. So it's really important that space that's owned by the people of Eastbourne becomes much more accessible to those residents. Here we can see through, I'm sure some of you have seen these renders before, but through to the new gallery building from the education entrance to the education wing and the events barns just on our right-hand side here. This is a really lovely building we call the boot room, which will allow certainly people engaging in the education to borrow wellies, coats, and the idea is to have all-terrain wheelchairs as well to allow better access to this landscape. We know that there is, really serious sort of problems with access to our natural landscape in this country. It's really important that this is a gateway for as many people as possible. This is a view of the education space. As you see, it's centered around an outdoor space with the cloistering, and that's really important because when people come up here and young people come up here, we want them to be outside, whether it be working with an artist or a scientist or historian or an archaeologist. The idea is that they will be equipped to be outside in nature as much as possible. Some views of the internal spaces and this brilliant heritage space, which is the old dairy, which we are maintaining as much as possible of the fabric of that, even the sort of blackboard tiles with the cows' names on it. Some of the other sort of refectory spaces and food spaces, again, keeping as much of the concrete apron of that farm area as absolutely possible. And again, all of the materials being reused on site. Where anything has to be moved, it'll be reused in another part of the site. Those brilliant Revilius paintings, well, with the landscape in the background. And some larger hangar spaces, and these are passive gallery spaces, so these won't have the museum controls of the first gallery space. And again, that's us pushing the museum sector to have a different approach to how we might borrow and show artworks in different sorts of spaces. This is the view from the western field up to the site. And this is a new pathway that part of the project will introduce along the northern boundary of the site. So it will connect into the existing path network at the bottom of the valley and allow better access through to Berlin Gap alongside. And there's some quite exciting conversations going on at the moment about the adjacent farm, Cornish Farm, and how that fits into the strategy. But it's worth just mentioning that part of this came out of the downland strategy, which identified Black Robin Farm as a key strategic site to allow better access to the downs. And so that this hasn't just come from nowhere. It's come out of that downland plan, and it's really important. The other thing it's worth saying is that it's for a visitor profile. We know that Eastbourne is limited on offers that don't have to be outside. So an indoor offer, and there's many spaces on this site that would allow people to not be out in the weather. And again, that's a big thing in surveys we get back when visitors are surveyed, is there isn't enough. Like today, if we have a drizzly July day in Eastbourne, there isn't enough of an offer in the town that takes people out of the weather. So this can further add to that portfolio. I think I'll leave it there because Fergus, you might have some other bits to add to that. Let me just come out of there.
Great, thank you, Joe. That's brilliant presentation. So there is a little bit of crossover with mine, but hopefully not too much. So let me just make sure this shares okay. Okay, is that showing for everyone? Yeah, great. So just a tiny bit of context about us and how we got involved with the project. This is a completely unique project, and it combines a load of our experience around the country from other kind of nationally significant projects. So in the top right here is an image of the Western at Yorkshire Sculpture Park, which was another landscape-led project, and it was really about creating access to the landscape for different user groups who wouldn't naturally necessarily visit galleries or wouldn't have the opportunities. And I think Black Robin is going to do that again. It's going to widen the audiences and make an extremely kind of inclusive and inspiring place to visit. We're also working at the Natural History Museum in London and National Railway Museum in York. So we've been trying to kind of pull all of the knowledge of all of these different spaces, many of which are very landscape led, to Black Robin and make sure that all of that. All of the consultations we've done on other jobs and the consultations we've done for Black Robin are all informing the design. So this is the wonderful site as it exists, and as Joe showed one of the images of how it's been developing. It is entirely landscape led because this is a unique part of the South Downs that actually isn't publicly accessible at the moment, but it has the opportunity to really inspire people and kind of break down the thresholds to landscape, to art, to culture in a way that that very few sites, almost if no other sites in the country, can do. Certainly that I've come across. So we know where the context is. It's right on the edge of Eastbourne, and the sustainable transport links are really critical to the success of this scheme. And we've gone through extensive consultations with the planners to look at how we're getting visitors there. Unfortunately, it is so close, and these public rights of way that we're linking up places like Berlin Gap and the new public footpath is going to be critical to the success of that. So these are some historic plans of the site. and it was all arranged around these south-facing fold yards. And we're retaining those existing buildings, and so the reading of the landscape is really critical through retaining the form of those structures and these protected yard spaces. Joe showed some of the images earlier of the learning yard, which is off to the right here, and then we're looking at future phases, including productive gardens, and all of this is all in the context of creating additional biodiversity net gain on the site, which is quite significant, over 30%. The heritage aspects of the project are also fundamental. Looking at the chalk and lime and flint barns, retaining all the materials on site, and even lots of the structures like the portal frame barns, which are coming down, they're being recycled and being moved as the farmer is being relocated to an adjacent farm. The palette of materials is beautiful, and I'm sure that anyone who visits this site is going to be as excited as the rest of us have been as we've encountered it. So in this image, you can see this is an aerial view, and again, it's around these protected yard spaces. The design has evolved around those, and it's very legible and simple and quite low slung, so it doesn't have a big visual impact on the wider landscape. Sustainability has been at the core of the design, and we really think that there's a space for every different type of user group on this site. I don't know if people here know of other sites around the country, but there's one in the West Country called Hauser and Worth. That's a farm site. This is similar, but this is entirely public. I mean, it's the brief here is so much more inspiring because of the access for everyone. So this is just about the low-tech approach. So what we're using is unfired clay bricks to help regulate the humidity in the galleries. I won't go into the technical detail, but we're going to be saving more than 50% of the energy which you typically use in a gallery space through these strategies and the mass of the building and kind of passive solar principles. The target is extremely low for a gallery in terms of energy usage. And it's all been future-proofed to be net zero. In terms of the materiality, we are recycling all the materials that we're taking down on the site, but most of the buildings are being retained. And then we're looking at using a palette of materials that's really from the area, so chalk and flint and reusing brick. And I think everyone would agree that it captures the natural light in a particularly beautiful way. And then there's just a few visuals to round up on. So we've seen this shows the new accessible route down into the site on the left-hand side, separating pedestrians from vehicles. There aren't many vehicles going down into the site. It's going to be an extremely tranquil, beautiful, kind of reflective, calm space. Education buildings off to the right, events off to the left, events off to the right. In all of these spaces, there's external connection to the landscape and to the views and also to the buildings. And the whole thing has been designed so that anyone in a wheelchair can access every space via ramps and not via lifts, despite the significant level changes across the site. And then education spaces, again, relating back to the landscape with views, kind of quite simple, robust, raw, economically kind of viable and appropriate buildings, and then spilling out from these courtyards into the landscape. This section just shows how the height of the new buildings, the gallery on the left-hand side is lower than the existing events barn, and how we're bedding it into the landscape to benefit from thermal mass, but also have minimal visual impact. And then the very warm internal spaces using, again, timber and materials that have their own kind of character, natural patina. And then this is the existing milking parlour, which we're retaining. It has a wonderful quality as it is. It's a kind of coats-on experience for education, future refectory, and then this just shows all of the whole scheme. And off to the right-hand side, the very small amount of car parking that is bedded into the landscape through a bund around it, and it's sunken so that there isn't the visual impact on the wider setting, but also it means that people walk down into the site and experience it in a unique way. And this is a more foggy view of the one that Joe showed earlier, and just showing that public footpath. I think it's going to be a unique setting, and it's the most special project I've worked on. So I'm extremely privileged to be involved. But yeah, thank you,
Fergus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe and Fergus, for putting together those presentations and taking us through them. Certainly they're very informative and answer some questions that colleagues and friends have been asking me. But we want to try and get to as many questions as we now can from you. And some people have sent them in advance, and thank you for doing so. So another large section of the questions we received were from people concerned about parking at the site and sustainable transport options. Please tell us more about parking and how the carbon footprint of more cars on the Downs will be offset, or what kind of arrangements are being made for sustainable public transport options. And that's from Susan.
Yeah, I mean, Fergus, jump in if you want to. I mean, obviously for us, we were very conscious of this problem. And as I mentioned earlier, we've already 900,000 cars on the Beachy Head Road. We really don't want to add to that if possible. So, I mean, getting people to site sustainably has been a priority ever since we started the project. What I can say is, as part of the planning commitment, we are committing to expanding the bus services, the public bus services to site. And we're just in the negotiation points with the bus companies about that. Again, it's just about working out how we can make the economic viability of those before we've proved the sort of need for it. But for me, it's about actually having the project being catalyst for a bigger conversation about the transport issues across that site, because there's issues at Berlin Gap, there's issues at Beachy Head, there's issues at Seven Sisters Visitor Centre. And, one project, what we can do is convene those organisations, and we can start to talk about what other solutions we can put in place. I mean, for example, we've been piloting a bus shuttle service called the Sussex Art Shuttle, which runs Friday, Saturday, Sunday at the moment. And it runs from here to Seven Sisters Visitor Centre, up through Alfriston to Charleston Farmhouse, and then into Lewes. And that's been really, really popular and is really working quite well. And that's really helping us to gather the data that we need to be able to run our own shuttle service to Black Robin Farm, and how we might run that economically and make that work. I mean, what's been interesting about that is that people are using it as a commuter service out of Alfriston and East Dean. So it just demonstrate the need for further investment in bus services. But the other thing that we're working quite closely with colleagues at the council, but also places like Natural England, is around how we can improve cycleways, pathways, up to site. And there is some quite good facilities going to be on site for parking bikes and even charging electric bikes as well as electric cars. What I would say about the car park is it is greatly reduced to about 45 spaces in total, and we'll be doing everything to discourage people from using those spaces, including chargers and things like that. And we have made a commitment through Section 106 that we will reduce those numbers over time as well. So South Downs National Park have put as part of the criteria that we will make a commitment over 10 years to make reductions in those. So it is incentivized to sort of ensure. But for me, I think, there's now the time, and we are having those conversations about how can we really sort this problem out more strategically across the whole site.
Great. Thanks very much, Joe. Understandably, as well as parking, people have concerns about environmental and sustainability. And Kerry is asking, and how will you limit the ecological damage to the Downs? I don't know if you'd like to respond to that one, Fergus.
Yeah, thank you. So the principles around the sustainable design are really around low embodied carbon and in terms of reducing the energy use of the buildings. But then in terms of the impact on the Downs, apart from the transport that Joe's just touched on, the other thing is that we're part of the criteria was about biodiversity net gain, and we're going to have over 30% biodiversity net gain on the site. which is pretty significant because the minimum that we had to reach was 10%. So we're far exceeding that. And part of it is also about chalk downland grass restoration. And that we would have 40% if it wasn't for that portion of chalk downland grass restoration. There's also things like some of the dew ponds are going to be restored. There's two dew ponds which are going to be restored as part of this. So everything has been designed to minimize the impact. We have ground source heat pumps. We have some photovoltaic panels. And then the buildings are as passive as possible where we can. So I think it is going to be seen as a real exemplar, and
does it also meet BREEAM status as well, which is a criteria for extremely
BREEAM excellent, exactly. Yeah, so very stringent criteria there.
New build elements.
Yeah. So we're really proud of the environmental credentials for the scheme.
And can I just add to that? I mean, I think that's really great, Fergus. But even on a more exciting note, I think what the project does allow us to do is to work really in partnership with, for example, we hosted an away day for Natural England at Towner and up to Black Robin Farm, and the conversations there were like, how can we help do experimental projects to improve wilding and naturing on the site? So I think there's an opportunity to use it as a space for us also to be bringing some of those projects in. We're talking about a super NNR, as they call it, which is another sort of level of sort of scrutiny around ecological restoration and certainly landscape management. And I think that's absolutely what we want this site to be, is to be a space where we can be working with colleagues like Natural England, the Environment Agency, to be improving the opportunity for wildlife on that site.
Okay, thank you both. Another question from Ting. The South Downs National Park is an international dark sky reserve. What measures will be taken to ensure that evening events don't cause light and noise pollution? I don't know if
we've actually been working with some of the astronomer groups in Eastbourne and hoping for them to move some of their activities to the site longer term. We've worked really closely with South Downs National Park on the lighting scheme, and for that very reason, to make sure that it is as minimal as possible and literally just does what is safely required to move people around at night time. There is also limitations on events we can do after hours as well. So part of the planning agreement is that there are limitations in terms of numbers of events that can take place that have an impact on that. But I would say that currently you've got a farm yard which is floodlit more or less most of the time. So, the improvement on the dark skies impact will be significant with this project.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joe. So just to say, we've got just over a quarter of an hour left. I can see that some people have put some questions in the Q&A, which should be in your Zoom toolbar at the bottom where it says Q&A. And we will respond to those. If we don't get to those in the webinar today, we will be aware of them and respond to those. But in the interest of fairness, we're going to go through the questions that people sent in advance. So another one for you, Fergus, if I may, this time about the architecture. And Margaret asks, why is the planned building so out of character with the area?
We actually feel that it's not out of character. I know that this is a subjective matter. The new gallery, which is the biggest new build element, is largely both sunken into the land, but it's also, there's a lot of subtle kind of references back to the other buildings on the site. So the pitches of the roofs are actually similar to that of the modern agricultural barns which are there. One of those agricultural barns, the big portal frame, is being moved to another site. The materials are actually much more appropriate than the current, largely kind of, we call it crinkly tin, but profiled metal sheeting on lots of those newer barns. So we're using flint and chalk and lime and natural materials for that new gallery. And there were endless tests actually of the massing and of the modeling, and we did test things like a view to putting more barn-like structures there. but they actually had a much greater impact visually on the context due to the levels. It's quite a kind of, it's a very complicated site in terms of the levels and making the whole place fully inclusive.
I think it's also a place to actually celebrate contemporary architecture that's in keeping with the space. And I think, we should be really embracing modern architectural practices in spaces like that. I think around the world, you see fantastic examples of the juxtaposition of contemporary architecture with landscape settings. And as I say, as long as it isn't, and we've worked very hard on the fact that it wouldn't interrupt those views and it would complement them as much as possible. I think it's great and to be celebrated in Eastbourne as well, that we're working with such a brilliant architect firm. We want to be the best in the world, really, and we want to have architecture that matches that. Eastbourne was always built on significantly imposing and impressive architecture, and I don't see why that should be any different now.
Okay, thank you both. Several questions from people who had concerns over what the benefit the project would have for local residents. So this one's anonymous, and that's absolutely fine. You don't have to put a name against questions, but would one of you like to respond to why are the council spending money for the benefit of visitors rather than the benefits of residents?
Well, I think there's 2 points to this answer, really. I mean, the first is that, the number one industry in Eastbourne is the visitor economy. Around 35% of the jobs in this town do rely on the visitor economy, so it cannot be ignored. If we are to continue to build a strong economy that supports everybody, we do need to ensure that there is a strong visitor economy. But I would argue that it's simply for visitors because, hopefully we've demonstrated, this site is got lots of different user groups, and one of its primary aims is to allow access for residents onto the downland space that is owned by them. And it's a gateway to that landscape. And I know that there are challenges around transport access from eastern wards in the town. And I think, I really am keen to try and tackle some of those. As an organisation, we work extensively with Willingdon Trees and over in the east of the town. So we know that community well. And what we want to make sure is that it's as easy for them to get access to this site as it is from somebody from Meads or from Old Town as well.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I think it's going to be the most incredible local resource and source of civic pride. Certainly, based on similar projects that we've worked on previously, they've been incredibly well adopted locally. And although there are external visitors, of course, as part of the mix of people, they can be one of the biggest sources of civic pride and resources for the community.
I think it's worth saying as well, making a tangible link between the visitors that are already on that landscape and Eastbourne is absolutely critical. Ensuring that the visitors that are already on the Beachy Head Road, Burling Gap, and exploring the Seven Sisters are actually using Eastbourne as a hub. So that's the key to this strategy, and that's why it's important that we have a really powerful asset in that landscape that can make that direct connection. And that's why it's important that town is involved so heavily, because we can make that link, we can build an offer that's connected across the two sites.
So thank you both. And staying with that theme of benefits to the locality, Sean is asking, assuming that you are, how do you propose to integrate local hospitality businesses into the Black Robin Farm development, specifically the hotels and smaller independent cafes and restaurants? And following on from this, will you propose to prioritise local people and businesses first for associated opportunities, assuming they are both capable and cost effective?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really big thing for me that an organisation like ours really prioritises local businesses in our own spend, because we are able to leverage in money from external sources. And I think the worst thing is when that money just goes straight out of our community. So where possible, we do try and prioritise. And I think Black Robin Farm, I hope, would be an exemplar in that, in terms of working with those businesses locally. For example, all of the technical staff that work on the exhibitions at the gallery are all local artists that we invest in terms of freelance time to come in and build those spaces. Skills and jobs is a really big priority of this site, and there are lots of commitments we've made through Levelling Up that we will be honouring. We have a skills producer as part of our team now, and that's a permanent position, who's working closely with organisations like Talent Accelerator and Coastal Catalyst to make sure that there are opportunities for young people in the town to develop really fantastic skills within all of these organisations. But I will just, on the hotel front, absolutely, I see the hotels here as the key to this, because actually most seaside towns in their long-term strategy have taken down a number of their hotels. The brilliant thing about Eastbourne is because of the covenants and things, a lot of the hotels have been retained on the seafront, and actually we have more bedrooms in Eastbourne than in Brighton. So there's a great opportunity now to be the hub in which this is the place you come to sort of explore Sussex more generally. Through the Turner Prize, we work with some fantastic hotel partners, particularly the Lansdowne, the View, and others as well locally, who were really supportive and saw the real benefits of working with a cultural organisation. And we want to expand that through Eastbourne Alive. We worked with the Hospitality Association. I'm a director on the Chamber of Commerce as well. I'm very keen to talk about how these projects benefit local businesses, because otherwise we're not doing our job as an organisation. That's what we're here to do.
Thank you, Joe. Anna Kay is asking, for day visitors to benefit the local economy, they need to spend money. How is it proposed day visitors to Eastbourne, and one assumes in time to Black Robin Farm, will be enticed into direct spending? Day visitors cause damage to the local infrastructure. Direct spending is required to not only offset this damage, and also to benefit the local economy.
Yeah, it's a tricky question. I mean, I think firstly, I would say that part of this project is to encourage more longer stays from our sort of visitor profile. And I think that's where we can convert some of those day visitors maybe into staying a night or a weekend, which, as I mentioned from the figures earlier, we know invests a lot more money into our local economy. And it also invests, if they are culturally minded visitors, into more independent businesses, which is, again, keeping the money in our immediate economy rather than sending it out. I mean, day visitors are a big part of Eastbourne's current visitor profile. And I think what we've noticed from the gallery is we've tried very hard through projects like Eastbourne Alive to connect those visitors into a wider business group. And I think we want to carry on that work to make sure that people experience all aspects of Eastbourne, and even projects that might take people to different parts of Eastbourne, like Langley Shopping Centre and things, where we're working with artist Verity Jane Keefe. And I think similarly, encouraging those visitors to not just stick to the sort of core routes, but also to explore Eastbourne more widely. I mean, I think the day visitor is an important visitor, but if we can convert them into staying longer and spending more, that's exactly what this project is trying to do.
Thank you, Joe. And this one specifically for you, I think. What is the intended relationship between this project and the practices of the Town Gallery?
It's a really, really good question, because as I said to you earlier, we're not trying to recreate the Towner in this setting. It's very much about celebrating that landscape and the heritage of that space. But obviously we do a lot in the gallery already. And I think what I've realised is that the team here are fantastic at trying to build that connection between landscape and art, in nature and art. And I think that's something that we really want to expand into the space at Black Robin Farm. It allows us maybe to have more of the fantastic Towner collection on display either at Towner or Black Robin Farm. I mean, at the moment, we do struggle for space. It's unbelievable to think, but we have so many ideas of fantastic projects. We actually really struggle to fit them all in the building. And therefore, I think the team is such a creative and imaginative team. We won't have any problems sort of expanding that into a new setting. And I suppose that's the exciting bit for me, is that we are in this new space, in a very different space, working with heritage experts, working with people that are concerned with the environment. It's new to us, and that's where brilliant projects come from. I think there's an opportunity to work in partnership with some people to do something a bit different on Black Robin Farm and to push what a museum can be, or a cultural space.
Joe, thank you. We're obviously very conscious of time. We're pressed for time. We've got about 6 minutes left. So what we've got now are some questions that were sent in advance that we think we can pick up fairly quickly. We'll have a go. Claire asks, when the scheme at Black Robin Farm was first discussed, a proportion of the buildings were earmarked for use by local craftspeople. Is this still the plan?
Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, there are some studio spaces there that are available for local makers to use as part of their practice. But equally, I think there's a lot of other space on the site where we can help showcase. And part of that early business model is about events and activities that help to showcase makers and artists from Sussex. So I think there is absolutely opportunities. And what we have done is there are portions of the site that are not developed yet, and really allow us the ability to see where we take the project in the future. And there could be opportunities to work in partnership with some fantastic makers locally to create different types of spaces that can be used. And the education wing, as we talked about, the model for that is very much that lots of different partners might be delivering activity there. It won't just be members of the town or team, but it enables practitioners locally to potentially deliver their own activity within that space, which I think is really exciting.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Elspeth is asking, will there be opportunities for both paid and voluntary work?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's big commitments around new members of staff to operate the site. But also we have a really strong volunteer program at the town already. And we would always love to expand that. I mean, if they're interested, do get in touch with us because there is always opportunities.
And Debbie asks, who will be funding the centre if it runs at a loss after a few years? Eastbourne Borough Council or us as residents?
It was really clear from day one, and this was part of that initial process we talked about with the bid, that the council were not going to underwrite any projects, and that was really, really clear. So on the capital project, we are working within the envelope we've got, and given inflationary challenges, that is an enormous challenge, and we have had to look at the plans with that in mind. But we're also able to leverage in additional funds. I think having that commitment from the government and having such an exciting and visionary project is enabling us to have better, conversations with other funders as well. I think so. In terms of who will take it on, I mean, I think it is, we are a cultural organisation that's been through lots of different financial and social and economic and political scenarios. And we've got a really skilled team in making sure that we are sustainable, and we are working on new sort of business strands and thinking about how the site is sustainable. So there is a very robust business plan that will help us to make sure that we achieve that, and we wouldn't be sort of hoping that we wouldn't have any losses after a few years.
Great, thank you, John. I'm going to squeeze a couple more in if I can. So again, it's Debbie. It may be a different Debbie, I don't know, but the question is, are you going to charge your visitors, or will it be free to residents?
I think that the intention is that the site is free to access. There will be elements of ticketed things to generate income, but we want this site to be used by as many people as possible. So that's the premise that we're working on, is that the site will be free to access. And hopefully, if there is sort of portions of land around that, that will be equally as accessible.
Thank you. How have projected visitor numbers and income been calculated, and have those projections been independently verified?
So certainly through the bid process, they had to go through some quite robust government scrutiny. And that was done by experts that were working for the government that were assessing those assumptions, and they all came back. So I suppose if you see that as independent, then yes. But as we all know, a business plan and a plan for running anything is not a fixed entity, and we are constantly revisiting that as social, political, economic situations change. We have a very good sort of group of people around us helping us to shape that, and we're making it as adaptable as possible, so it's got a versatility to it. But the government departments are very, very involved, and we have regular catch-ups with them where they are interrogating these figures and sort of ensuring that we're on track with progress and things. So there's a number of different agencies that are involved in doing that.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everybody, for your questions, whether you sent them in advance, whether you've put them in the live Q&A facility. we are aware of those, and there will be some responses. But I'm going to hand over to Joe now because time has caught up with this, and this is the end of the webinar.
Oh, well, thank you, Lee, and thank you, Fergus. And I must just thank all of the team at Towner as well, who's helped pull this together, and everybody who's submitted questions. It's been really great to get some of them out. I know we haven't got to all of them that you sent through, but I know I'm going to meet with a few people directly just to sort of try and discuss some of the things that have come up. And we will have more of these and opportunities. We do have an email address in the chat there. If people feel as though something really wasn't answered, they want to send it in again, and we'll come back to you on email or give you a call about it. Thanks to Maria as well for the captioning. Didn't see it, but I'm sure it was brilliantly done. And thank you all for attending, and hope to see you again at one of these soon or in the gallery. Thank you.